Our guest today is Akira Kojima, whose name marvelously means small island, which I think has a real charm. He'll be speaking on the restructuring of the Japanese economy and its global implications. He's eminently qualified, as you all know. He's been a journalist and economist for 20-some years. He received his undergraduate degree from Masita University. He studied economics at Manchester University. He's the author of at least 2 highly regarded books. The most recent is Years of Adjustment. His first major work was The Corporation, What Is It?, for which he's received several awards. We're always interested, of course, in the role of Japan in the international economy. To address the topic of the restructuring of the Japanese economy and its global implication, it's my great pleasure to introduce to you Mr. Akira Kojima.
Thank you, Dr. Bhatt. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. I have here many thanks and many cheers and some apologies. Many thanks for giving me this kind of wonderful opportunity. It's more than my honor. I try. I have many thanks and many cheers and some apologies. Many thanks for your kindness and hospitality. I have more than honor to be here and to be given this kind of opportunity to try to speak just in front of so important people of the city. Many cheers for the ever more beautiful city of yours. It's quite amazing to see. I actually visit half day or one day every year to this city. But each time I find your city is getting more beautiful. It's quite amazing. And you have many strong baseball team and so forth. It's quite amazing. So many cheers for those and some apologies. Well, American, generally speaking, as is often the case, begins some remarks with a lot of humor and jokes. Vis-a-vis Japanese, begins mostly with apologies. Maybe I'm from the small island, but not from the same planet, with very small resources. So maybe we are in shortage of the resources of jokes and humors. Another apology is something about my linguistic capability. Well, I'm a son of my Japan's poor language education system of English. And I must tell that our former Prime Minister, Takeshita, who is not necessarily distinguished, but clearly and obviously extinguished, he used to teach English way back several decades ago. And yet, he speaks less than smattering of English. Only thank you and goodbye, maybe. So I naturally have deep sympathy and share the misery with his students. And the title you gave me today is tremendous. And as I found that nowadays free lunch is getting scarce and more scarce, I must try to perform something. And well, before going to before discussing about how Japan changed, I'd like to try to formulate my own vision about the next coming decade. Before what kind of coming decade will be. I can pick up some aspects. Maybe the past may be a twilight of a strong political ideology. Now in China something is happening, but it's maybe and should be temporary. you are successful in exporting democracy and information society to Gorbachev. And by Gorbachev, China is now feeling the impact of information and democracy days. So the democracy may stay. So this sad tragedy may last only, it may be short-lived, I hope. Anyway, twilight of strong ideology may be the character, one of the major characters of the coming decade. The second, relating to the first characteristic, political pragmatism, or some economists say pragmatic or practical internationalism. And any country are now more and more interdependent. And now we are now in the process of seeing the global economy. And when I met some American economists, he was saying that we now have two types of economists. One is international economist. The other is unemployed economist. So maybe you used to have domestic, purely domestic economists and a smaller number of international economists. But now these things is beginning to change. And now the third point is continuation of Asia-Pacific dynamism. This includes Asia Pacific. Pacific includes North America. And or maybe next maybe the character may be decade or not day of reckoning of U.S. twin deficits and Japanese trade surplus. It may take time, but we must rectify this kind of imbalance by any means. And next, revitalization of once pessimistic Europe. We used to hear the word Euro-pessimism. Now they are getting more optimistic, not to the degree of Europhoria, but anyway, they are getting some optimism. That may be good. And another character may be something to do with, technology innovation and its new uptrend. These may be the characters of the coming decades. And well, amazingly or interestingly, I can detect these kind of characters emanates mostly from the year 1985. I personally feel that the year 1985 was a watershed year and a very long historical perspective. Most of the possible characteristics of the just above mentioned are just coming from the set of conditions, mostly very, very fundamental, not temporary, all coincidentally came out of this year. Let me try to pick up some examples. One, Mikhail Gorbachev came into power. And toward the end of this very year, 1985, you had the first ever summit meeting between President Reagan and Gorbachev. This is a beginning of this, toward what we are now having. You are now continuation of dialogue between Russia and your country. And the next point is U.S. turned into, well, on paper, at least, net data country position. In the first year in the 71 years. And at the end, Japan became, this is again just on paper, and some economists may be against about this idea, but on paper, well, by statistics only, became largest creditor nation status. And also relating to these 2 points, the sudden eruption of trade-related legislation movements in U.S. capital. And naturally, toward the end, around the end of this year's September 22nd, you had the Plaza Conference attended by 5 major industrial countries, where they announced the currency adjustment, realignments, and macroeconomic harmonization or coordination, new efforts in structural policy coordination by all these participating 5 countries. And another point, new initiatives on LDC data country problems by US and many other countries. And now I can pick up some others. US trade activism. Now famous Article Section 301. But in this year, after the Plaza Agreement, US government began to have the self-initiation of this article, Section 301. Before that, the US government used to just respond, only when they have some requests from the part of business. But this time and onward, the USTR began to take action by themselves, what they call the self-initiation of Section 301. And lastly, EC, European Community Commission, published a white paper on unified Europe. So these are the very, very important set of changes or movements or events which we are now feeling. And this may be felt in the coming decade. And the coming decade may be characterized as a decade of big transformation, economically and politically. So this is my basic understanding about the coming decade. And the point is how to relate these with the present situation of EC movement, Japanese restructuring, US policy changes. Well, I'll try to do that. Well, we used to characterize the world system in the way we used to have East and West based on strong ideologies. East economic bloc, a political bloc, vis-a-vis Western democratic blocs. Or North and South. North are getting richer and the South are getting even more poor. Those were the scenario. And or oil producers, OPEC type of oil producers and consuming countries. Sometimes NOPEC. People describe NOPEC, non-oil producers. OPEC was called as a not oil producing country, but organization of creating economic calamities. This is the OPEC is the abbreviation of that kind of thing. But actually, this is gone. Now we have not the typical classical confrontation between East and West, but this is now getting softer. And Gorbachev seems to be one of the most sexiest politicians in this society, I suppose. And in Europe, maybe he is competing with Margaret Thatcher in terms of popularity in the UK. This is a tremendous change. And so what happened? The people interest is now being shifted from military security affairs to economic affairs. When I visited Washington, D.C. this last April, I met Senator Roth, the author of the joint author of the Kemp-Roth big tax reform. His catchword was something like this. He said, the economy is the name of the game, because the U.S. is now at the part of the ever more global interdependent society, economy. Secondly, we are now in the midst of a new uptrend of technological innovation, technological development. So these two elements is more important than impending military threat or security threat. So people's interest is surely shifting from military or to economic matters. So in a sense, coming easy markets throughout 1992 may be a threat for some of the people, policymakers in Washington, or Asian countries, including needs countries, or you may call it for dragons or for gangsters. But it keeps a very big dynamism, and also Japan. So those countries, and possibly top of the list may be Japan, is in a sense substituting, replacing the place of superpower Russia, because of the general shift of interest from military to economy. So we are now having not the East-West relation conflict, but within the East and the West and West is now the problem. We need some adjustment among ourselves, East, West and West. This is the issues which we must face in the coming decade. My friend Ben Friedman, the professor of the Harvard, wrote a book recently titled The Day of Reckoning. He is trying to persuade American readers that day will come for American economy, it's reckoning, unless you tackle the present twine deficits immediately in a very short period of time. But my perception is not the day of the reckoning, but decade of reckoning. It's a gradual process. Structural process will last longer, but it must be fundamental. And as for the restructuring of Japan, I detect some basic change under the surface. Although we don't see on the surface big improvement, especially as for the trade pictures. But under the surface, I detect many changes, which are very, very fundamental, and which are different from the last changes, which are mostly temporary, short-lived. But this time, some signs of big change, which may be lasting longer time. And well, the major change is that Japanese market economy is, for the first time ever, is showing some encouraging signs of being linked to the global market, first time ever. It seemed once, but it didn't last very long in the past. Why? Well, actually, last year, Japanese increase of imports was somewhere around $38 billion last year, vis-a-vis $31 increase in US as for imports. This is the first time ever that Japan increased annual imports than US. US for so many years imported too much. Japan exported too much. But some change, which I detect very, very fundamental, is emerging. And why so? Because of the set of changes which emanates in the year 1985. For Japan, the biggest engine for change is exchange rate change. We in the past had two other episodes of high exchange rates for our currency. The first came in the year 1971. This is the year when we had what we call the Nixon shock. It was really a shock. And we witnessed some turmoil, the confusion in our economy. And the recession followed very soon. And second came in the year 1978, around September, October. This is a third round of a big international multilateral exchange rate change. But this time around, exchange rate change is very different, importantly, in many points. First, the magnitude of appreciation or depreciation is tremendously large. In retrospect, in the first episode of exchange rate change, yen appreciated vis-a-vis US dollar only 16.88%, less than 20. Now, in the past 10 years, on average, we have the fluctuation, annual fluctuation with exchange rates more than or nearly 20%. We had a very discussion in that year, 1971, over exchange rate realignment. But when we look back now, from now, it's just a small change. People say, economists say that it's just too small. But it creates some confusion. But the only confusion, no basic change. And second came in the year, which came in the year 1978, was all appreciation or the exchange rate change was much bigger, maybe 40–50% change. But this was very short-lived, because your central bank recognized this is a very fundamental problem for US dollar. Then some meeting or the dialogue was introduced, and it invited the massive intervention by many central banks. So it was a temporary matter. It disappeared all the overnight. This time the exchange rate change lasts more than 3 years. It may last more years. And another point that relating to that, the first episode of high exchange rates of our currency was followed by first oil crisis. The second appreciation of our currency was followed by second oil crisis. So the two important roles by the OPEC countries, namely the Organization of Producing Economic Calamities. But they didn't create calamities. They created blessing, because the huge problematic Japanese surplus disappeared overnight because of this sudden increase of prices of oil. We don't have any resources for petroleum, oil. So we must import almost 100% from other countries. So the payments for imports of oil was all of a sudden become exorbitant. So overnight we witnessed the disappearance of a huge trade surplus. The second scenario was also. But this time around, we don't see any such kind of repetition of the magnitude of the past two crises of oil. What does it mean? It means that we don't see sudden disappearance of huge surplus or deficits of U.S. part. It may continue. While it's continue, we must do our efforts through the market, through exchange rate change, through other policies. So these are the differences which we must put importance from the previous two episodes of high exchange rates or previous two episodes of exchange rate adjustments. And on top of that, next countries, Korea, Taiwan, and so forth, are now emerging as the first ever as the major player in the international trading game. And another point is something to do with the political climate. Now, we have the atmosphere where it's easier to invite political reaction and easier to invite some protection measures or some direct or artificial policy measures. So with these differences, Japanese business began to change, are forced to change. Actually, especially after the latter part of 1987, many Japanese big industries began to have a second thought about their traditional pattern of management. They actually began to have new set of new long-term management strategy. What kind of change? Actually, they began to think about the possibility of importing parts and sometimes finished products. And they began to ship not only commodity, but also factories. Here you may see more Japanese companies coming. In the US, I suppose that in the, large and small included, some more than 1,200 Japanese manufacturers are doing some production, one way or another. This is a tremendous number. It may be increasing. And actually, the total accumulated balance of Japanese investments, Japanese by manufacturers in other countries than Japan, reached somewhere around $50 billion as of this last April. But out of this amount, amazingly, 51%, more than half, happened in the very short period of 3 years since 1986. So those 51% happened after the watershed year of the 1998 and 1985. This is tremendous. Another thing, this exchange rate change, which began to come out from 1985, created the international investment boom. In the US, in other countries, not only domestically, but also across the border. Last year, this moment, this year, some estimates say that the total international direct investment will reach $1 trillion. It's accumulated base, the balance. It's a tremendous amount. This means the offshore production. Many countries are doing such kind of offshore production, not in their domestic country, but in the other country. This is making the situation where economies are more and more interdependent. And another point that in Asia, they used to be just export countries, export-oriented countries. But in the past couple of years, I see they began to increase imports each other. Some countries increased their imports by more than 100% in a single year. Why so? Well, I see such kind of export of not commodities, but factories from US, from Japan, from Europe, from within Asian countries are emerging and increasing. And then it means that the increase of income of receiving countries of those such kind of investment and the capability of imports, exports also. But not only export, but they increase the capability to absorb imports from other countries. And this year, I suppose the total imports in Asia from non-Asian countries, Asia means Asia and these countries, Korea, Taiwan, and so forth, and ASEAN countries, and Japan, all included, will surpass $500 billion. This is more than the US total imports. And this was very small some years ago. So now we don't see only just export-oriented economies, but also imports is emerging, coming into the picture, even in Asia. And now we must look something about EC. EC is now doing very hard to revitalize their economy. And they are now, within the EC countries, they are now having increasing number of joint ventures, mergers, acquisitions. They are now having a larger scale of industries there. And because of that, many countries are very much concerned about. They may be strong, but they may be very exclusive. Maybe they may be very closed market. But I don't think so because of the interdependency. Because when I look into the detail of the statistics, I find that while they are increasing the mergers and acquisitions within the EC countries, they are also having increasing the joint ventures with non-EC countries. In the past 15, 20 months in particular, out of the total joint ventures, more than 50% are coming from with non-EC countries, non-EC companies. This is an important change. My observation is now that the adjustment through the market and through the business people are now emerging in many countries, many areas, many regions, and it's now creating a more interdependent economy. And my observation is that there is two kinds of clocks, political clock and economic clocks. They are ticking clearly. But political clock is ticking very quickly. Economic clock began to tick, but too slow. Maybe we should accelerate this political clock, economic clock. But anyway, it's begun to work. The difference of the two the clocks is something like this. The constituency of business, I think here we have many important business people. The constituency of business is not parochial. It's global. It's very great. And they are more or less future-oriented. Vis-à-vis politicians' constituency in many countries is very particular. They just look more to the present or past often. And well, the time horizon are also different. For business people, time horizon, future may be, long term maybe 10 years, maybe more than that. But for political, time horizon is at the longest is the period until next election. This is a tremendous gap. So we need, in this coming decade, there may be a big gap of speed of political clock and economic clock because the economy may be adjusting, and we are now seeing some signs of big change, on the part of the economy, on the part of business people, business companies, private business. But in Japan, for example, we had now some very much difficulty, problem as for politicians. They are talking only about themselves. They are talking about only about next election. They are not talking about international global economy. Only business and some policymakers on the part of bureaucrats are talking about that. So politicians, especially elected politicians, is now having a difficulty in many countries. But economy is very resilient. So how to harmonize these two types of clock may be a challenge. And lastly, as for the role of Japan in the future, in this coming decade, I think my conclusion is that Japan should import more. Japan should truly open Japanese market. Otherwise, we cannot achieve the target of restructuring. Well, different from U.S., especially after the war, you were very, very generous. You launched tremendously generous Marshall Plan. And also you have opened a very, very open market to all countries. So adjustment came through two channels, public sector and private sector. Private sector means through the markets. open market. Public sector through the donation, the economic assistance, general assistance. By these two channels, European economy revitalized, Japanese economy came in better shape. All other countries all enjoyed. So it's a success of American general policy. But the situation we now face is very funny situation. As on paper we are described as a creditor country, but we don't have public sector has an empty pocket. You had twin surpluses, both public sector side and private sector side after the war. But now Japan has only single surplus. That's only on the part of the private sector. So we are talking about economic assistance, ODA, official development assistance, and the total amount, sum of the assistance to the world is almost comparable to that size of the US now. And some Japanese government people say that we are now having the Japanese version of Marshall Plan. But my perception is very different. It's too arrogant. Why so? Because although it's the same size almost with that of the US, but the important point is the comparison between the economic assistance with the total imbalance, surplus. US devoted some 3% for, or as of total GNP for Marshall Plan after the war. Japan, we are now discussing about ODA, but this ODA is only 0.3%. Vis-a-vis our trade and current account surplus is on 3% as of total GDP. So this is a very different set of conditions. So what we see is we are not doing the Marshall Plan. We are not so generous. Government actually Japan, I should say that Japan is the, historically speaking, the most stingiest creditor in the history. So only private sector can be generous. So private sector, but they need some profits. They cannot continue losing money for many, many years. Otherwise they go into bankruptcy. So I can describe it's not a Marshall Plan, but it's a commercial plan. But not only the simple commercialism, but it needs some self-aspiration or self-enlightened commercialism. For that, one way is to increase imports. With imports, we create, on the part of exporting countries, jobs, incomes, and taxes. And another point is to have more direct investment, shipment or export of factories. And these factories should be more and more localized, harmonized to the community of receiving country. So these are the important challenges to have the, not the Marshall Plan, but enlightened commercial plan. This is our challenge. But the challenge, as for this challenge, as I mentioned just now, I detect some encouraging sign of change, as is described, as is expressed by the figure, $38 billion increase of imports in Japan last year, and vis-a-vis. US must have export-driven economic development. So other countries must be prepared to get more imports from US, from other countries. This is the challenge, not only for Japan, but for all economies in the world. And during this process, we are more and more interdependent. And the EC may be not called by the bloc, economic bloc, comparable to that of 1930s, but it's maybe a step toward more globalized, unified world economy. And I consumed valuable time so much, so I would like to conclude by quoting the Ellen Frost, charming lady's sentences. For the rest of this century and beyond, divorce between the United States and Japan is economically impossible, militarily impracticable, and politically unthinkable. And I hope this is true, and I am sure this is true. And thank you very much.
Well, that was unique in the sense that having remarked about the breadth of our topic, you broadened it, treated it systematically, and came back to the theme of the challenge to Japan and its restructuring. It was a very interesting presentation, and we do thank you for it. The question is, are Japanese politicians as parochial in the global economy as some others that may be identified?
I must confess that Japan, generally speaking, maybe 80%, 85%, 90% of Japanese politicians, elected officers, are very parochial. Very much parochial. Their constituency just not only Japan, but it's not even Japan. It's just a small village. And the discussion is very poor among themselves. They are just talking about the next election. And well, it's maybe a part of a democracy, but other citizens, voters, and business people in particular, must educate the importance of the global economy or importance of business constituency, which are very different from the politicians' constituency. And I don't know about many countries, but in Japan, the politicians are very, very parochial in their way of thinking.
Two questions. The first is there really a trade deficit or imbalance from the United States' standpoint when you consider that American corporations overseas are in fact, in a sense, exporting to the United States? First question. And the second question has to do with, very quickly,
the triad, the 630 million in three.
Should not the 630 million people who are really the people who consume goods rather than just surviving, should they not be designed into being the one large common market?
Wonderfully big question I've got. And for the first question, yeah, I think his analysis has some truth, but some truth. But if he, I don't agree in some points, because in order to have such kind of theory, we need some assumptions. For example, people must move freely across the border. Capital, factories must move freely across the border. Everything must move, every sources or elements of for production can be movable. But it is not so. So when you have the offshore production, it creates local income. When you have the export, it creates only income on the part of exporters. Maybe some dealers in the importing country may get some import, but mostly income. But mostly from the income goes to the exporters. So if the people can not move freely, it means still we have a border. that can not be applied to more generally. It can be applied. It is saying some truth, but I don't agree. It's because of that point. Because of that, we invite political pressures. Suppose you ship all factories there. Under his theory, that is your production in other countries. But the income is there. People are employed. They get the income. But you lose jobs. But according to his theory, this is just the balance of trade. But this is not so. When this with a borderless economy, truly, then we can, maybe many people move to the other country, and they get the income. But that kind of adjustment is possible. But reality is that people cannot move so freely. So income is not distributed evenly. So that is a missing point of his theory. It has some truth. So we see both sides of the economic activity, but it cannot conclude that we don't have any trade imbalance. We have imbalance, clearly imbalance. It must be rectified. Otherwise, politics cannot work. Another point, I hope to have such kind of dreamy scenario. That's maybe important. Actually, 80% may be contributed in that triad area. That's very important. So I'm not very familiar with that aspect of his theory, but I think there should be more harmonization of the system. In order to have such kind of triad world, many countries markets should be more similarly open. Markets for people, markets for commodities, market for capital, market for money, market for factories. Everything must be accepted equally. Then it creates a common market. Common market means non-tariff between themselves. If we have a tariff quotas and so forth, regulation, a different system, it's not a truly common market. We want to have, I myself want to have the tendency to movement toward that direction. It may take years, several decades at least, but it may not be attained in a short period of time, unless that kind of a change of the system is removed. So that is his theory has again some truth, but I don't necessarily agree in some points. We need to have some. It's worthwhile to do some efforts towards more unified global economy, but political reality is not ripe enough for the moment.
The Council tries to allow time to be our tyrant, and we will continue to do so and end the session more or less on time. I don't know if the most memorable part of the program is that Japan is the most stingiest creditor nation in history. Or that Anchorage, Alaska is the new epicenter of our global economy. The real highlight, I think, are the variety of interesting insights that you've presented and the coherence of your remarks, and we're indebted to you for that. It's been a most enjoyable and informative session. Thank you very much.